Off the southern coast of Turkey, beneath a steep slope of rock and clear blue water, a small ship came to rest in the late 14th century BC. It was not a grand fleet, nor a famous palace, and yet its cargo held the texture of an age. Copper from Cyprus, glass from Egypt, ivory, resin, jars, tools, ornaments, and the quiet belongings of people at sea were gathered together in one sinking moment and left there for more than 3,000 years. Around 1320 BC, give or take 15 years, a merchant ship passed along the southern coast of what is now Turkey and sank off Uluburun near Kaş, in the warm, island-strewn waters of the late Bronze Age Sea. It belonged to a century in which Egypt, the Hittite world, Cypriot ports, the cities of Syro-Canaan, and the palace societies of Mycenaean Greece were not distant, separate realms so much as regularly connected shores, linked by winds, harbors, gifts, demands, and cargoes. Only part of the hull endured on the seabed, yet that fragment is eloquent. The vessel had been built shell first, its cedar planks of Lebanese timber fastened edge to edge with pegged mortise and tenon joints around a rudimentary keel plank, a method already mature, already confident, and clearly meant for repeated journeys over open water rather than for a single cautious coastal run. What it carried was, above all, metal. Nearly 10 tons of copper ingots lay in the wreck, much of the load cast in the familiar oxhide form, whose 4 handles made heavy pieces easier to shift by hand. With them was roughly a ton of tin, close to the practical ratio of 10-to-1 used in making bronze, as if the ship were carrying not merely trade goods, but the raw arithmetic of tools, vessels, chariot fittings, and weapons for workshops far beyond the horizon. Around this dense core rested a quieter, more delicate cargo: cobalt blue and turquoise glass ingots, elephant tusks, ostrich eggshells, ebony, terebinth resin, sealed in Canaanite jars, strings or stores of faience beads, fine pottery, and small worked objects in gold, silver, carnelian, agate, and amber. The hold seems, in this light, less like a market stall gathered by chance than a carefully composed shipment in which bulk necessity and courtly refinement traveled side by side. Among the most evocative pieces was a gold scarab inscribed with the name of Nefertiti. It does not mean that the queen herself ever touched the object, still less that she knew this ship, yet it places the cargo within the same diplomatic and luxury circuits, glimpsed in the Amarna letters and in the palace archives of the age, where precious things moved with messages, favors, and obligations. The wreck also preserved the softer residue of life on board: balance weights, tools, lamps, cooking wares, weapons, fishing gear, and musical instruments, including lutes with tortoiseshell sound boxes, alongside personal belongings that suggest a Syro-Canaanite crew whose connections reached into the Aegean. Taken together, ship and cargo suggest a voyage directed toward wealthy recipients, perhaps leaving a Cypriot or Syro-Canaanite port and heading westward toward Rhodes or a Mycenaean palace, carrying in one wooden hull the patient, intricate order of an interconnected world. At some point late in its voyage, the ship seems to have come in close beneath the rocky Lycian coast, perhaps seeking a familiar landmark, a little shelter from weather, or simply the safer confidence of land kept in sight. There, near the headland of Uluburun, it likely struck the rocks or was driven onto them by wind and sea. The hull broke apart on a steep underwater slope, and the cargo, once so carefully packed, began to move under gravity and surge. Heavy copper ingots, jars, timbers, anchors, and small precious things spilled downward in stages, coming to rest between about 44 and 61 meters below the surface. In that descent, one can almost sense the order of the voyage loosening into a long diagonal trail, as if the ship's final moments were written across the seabed rather than contained in a single point of wreckage. For more than 3,000 years, the site remained there in darkness and current, until the summer of 1982, when a sponge diver named Mehmet Zunkir noticed what he memorably described as metal biscuits with ears. It was an exact and workmanlike phrase for the copper oxide ingots, whose 4 projecting corners gave them their distinctive shape. Zunkir's report reached Oğuz Alpozan of the Bodrum Museum of Underwater Archaeology, and from there, archaeologists working with the Institute of Nautical Archaeology came to examine the scatter off Uluburun. They confirmed, patiently and without much room for doubt, that this was not a stray cluster of ancient cargo, but one of the great Bronze Age wrecks ever found, a site capable of illuminating trade, seamanship, and daily practice all at once. In the years that followed, excavation proceeded over 11 field seasons, from 1984 to 1994, directed first by George F. Bass, and then chiefly by Cemal Pulak. More than 22,000 dives were logged at depths beyond 150 feet, each descent costly in time, air, and physical effort, and each object had to be recovered slowly, almost ceremonially, from a difficult slope. Because the seabed fell away so sharply, the archaeologists had to record not only what was present, but how each thing had slid, stacked, rolled, and settled after the wreck. The site became a 3-dimensional puzzle in which the position of ingots, jars, anchors, and surviving timbers helped reconstruct the original stowage of the ship before disaster undid it. That careful work restored small practical details that give the vessel its human scale. 24 stone anchors were recovered, suggesting a ship prepared for varied coasts and repeated mooring. Brushwood dunnage, laid beneath and between the heavy cargo to protect the hull, survived as a modest trace of forethought, the sort of material almost invisible when a voyage begins, and invaluable once it is over. Such remains do not speak in grand language. They speak of hands arranging weight, cushioning timber, checking gear before departure. In this way, the rediscovery of Uluburun was not only the finding of treasure, but the recovery of a working ship, assembled by experienced people who understood wood, stone, rope, and the uneasy movement of cargo at sea. The lasting importance of Uluburun lies not only in the beauty of any single object lifted from the seabed, but in the uncommon fact that so many materials from so many shores arrived together in one wooden hull. Copper from Cyprus, tin from farther east, glass ingots, ivory, resins, jewelry, pottery, tools, and worked luxuries were all packed into the same moving space, balanced against planks and brushwood, and trusted to the same voyage. Preserved by one sudden sinking, the wreck became a rare cross-section of the late Bronze Age economy, almost like a ledger closed in an instant. Before its discovery, much of this world was known through royal letters, tribute scenes, and painted tomb walls, where foreign goods appear in ordered processions and idealized exchange. Uluburun offered something quieter and more exacting. Not an image of commerce, but the cargo itself, confirming that raw materials, prestige goods, and finished objects traveled along the same maritime routes in company with one another as part of one practical system. In the years that followed, the ship continued to speak through laboratory work as much as through excavation. Analyses of metals, glass, and organic remains refined old assumptions and sometimes unsettled them. Study of the glass ingots has pointed strongly toward Egyptian production, while ongoing work on copper, tin, resins, woods, and small personal items continues to sharpen the question of where things were made, how they were processed, and through whose hands they passed. The cargo also complicated older habits of drawing neat cultural boundaries. Objects connected to Cyprus, the Levant, Egypt, the Aegean, and lands beyond were not separated into tidy compartments of identity. They shared one hold, one itinerary, and perhaps one set of negotiations. In that crowded space, merchants, sailors, palace agents, and gift networks seem less like distinct worlds than overlapping circles, meeting in harbors, storerooms, and on decks salted by the same wind. Many of these artifacts were conserved and displayed at the Bodrum Museum of Underwater Archaeology, where the reconstructed hull and arranged cargo help restore the wreck to its proper scale. Seen there, the ship is not merely treasure spread under glass. It becomes evidence of craft, labor, bookkeeping, taste, and long-distance trust. The measured casting of ingots, the packing of jars, the selection of ornaments, the confidence that distant partners would recognize value in familiar forms. In this way, Uluburun has remained a benchmark for Bronze Age archaeology, often described as one of the most important underwater discoveries of the 20th century. Its deeper lesson is calm and expansive. 3,000 years ago, the Mediterranean was already an inhabited web of roots and expectations, carried not in abstraction, but in wood, rope, sail, and the patient arrangement of cargo in a dark hold. In the end, the Uluburun Shipwreck feels less like a disaster than a preserved conversation between distant coasts. In its hold, the Late Bronze Age appears not as isolated kingdoms on a map, but as a shared maritime world stitched together by weight, craft, diplomacy, and the patient movement of ships.